A serene Georgia street was about to become a raw open-air stage for a confrontation when two men in tactical cosplay tried to apprehend a homeowner. But the man they chose was not just any resident. He was the federal agent they should have known never to challenge. On a brilliant Saturday morning in Serenity Creek, the kind of morning where the scent of cut grass hangs in the air and children's laughter echoes down the lanes, Elias Corbin stepped out of his stately brick house with a simple goal: take the trash to the curb. He barely made it 10 paces before his senses snagged on 3 figures poised at the end of his driveway. 2 men stood clad in black tactical-style vests adorned with patches that declared community compliance, and positioned between them was Miranda Croft, the president of the Homeowners Association. Her face was a mask of grim determination, and theirs was just as unyielding. Elias slowed his pace, the plastic of the trash bag crinkling in his hand as he studied the trio. To an anxious neighbor, they might have projected a veneer of authority, but to him, something felt deeply wrong. Their vests were a study in mismatch, one hanging too loose, the other with Velcro straps dangling like loose threads. Their boots were worn and scuffed, suggesting a second-hand origin, and their posture, too rigid, too self-consciously rehearsed, set off a cascade of silent alarms in his mind. "Mr. Corbin," Miranda began, her voice honed to a sharp edge, as if she had rehearsed this very moment, "we have to talk." Elias calmly set the trash bag on the ground, placing his hands on his hips. "About what?" One of the men stepped forward, a tall, pale figure with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses that concealed his eyes completely. "Community compliance," he stated, his voice a flat monotone. "You're in violation of neighborhood covenants." "We're here to detain you until the authorities arrive." The words landed with a thud. "Detain me?" Elias repeated, a note of near amusement coloring his low tone. Miranda crossed her arms, a gesture of tight finality. "You've disregarded multiple notices, and this has escalated. We cannot permit someone to consistently undermine our community standards. These gentlemen are here to ensure you cooperate." Elias arched an eyebrow, his gaze shifting from Miranda to the 2 would-be officers. "And what precisely are these charges?" The second man, shorter and broader with an unkempt beard, retrieved a creased sheet of paper from his vest. "Property code violations, non-compliance with HOA directives, unauthorized alterations to your driveway, disruptive gatherings. The list is extensive," Elias almost chuckled. "So, you believe that grants you the authority to march onto my property and, what was the term you used, detain me?" The taller man's jaw clenched. "That's correct. You can cooperate peacefully, or we can make this more difficult for you." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The entire neighborhood felt paused, as if listening intently. From a house a few doors down, Elias saw a curtain twitch, a silent observer, then another. He recognized the pattern, eyes peering from behind blinds, phones ready in hand. Elias took a deliberate step forward, his voice a calm current over a core of steel. "Let me clarify something for you. There's no entity called community compliance. You are not law enforcement. You possess zero authority here, and you are trespassing on my property." Miranda's cheeks burned with a sudden flush. "Don't you dare lecture me about authority, Elias. You think you're exempt from the rules because of who you are? We've received genuine complaints, and I will not stand by as this neighborhood deteriorates." The bearded man fidgeted, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, but the taller one remained rigid, his hand hovering just over his belt, a calculated gesture meant to imply he was armed. Elias tilted his head, his gaze piercing. He had encountered men like this before, wannabes who believed a vest and a stern expression made them invincible. But he also knew something they couldn't possibly guess, that he wasn't merely a homeowner. He was a highly trained federal agent who had dedicated years to taking down criminal enterprises and interrogating men far more menacing than these 2 pretenders. But instead of revealing his hand, he simply smiled. "You've chosen the wrong driveway today." Miranda stepped closer, her voice climbing in pitch. "Don't you dare test me. Elias, these men have the authority to hold you until the police get here, and when they do, You'll be the one facing the questions. It was then that Elias finally let the trash bag drop. The plastic split just enough for a soda can to escape, its metallic clatter echoing down the quiet street. It wasn't the sound of surrender. It was the sound of a man planting his feet, bracing for a confrontation that was destined to unfold in a way Miranda could never have imagined. Neighbors drew nearer to their windows. A teenage boy across the way lifted his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. This moment had grown larger than a homeowner and an HOA president. It was about to become a spectacle for the entire neighborhood. But as charged as the air already felt, the true battle for control had only just begun. The silence hanging between them didn't last. The taller man took a challenging step forward, his boots grinding against the concrete as if to mark his territory on Elias's driveway. His mirrored sunglasses threw back a reflection of Elias's own calm face, but inside, the imposter was vibrating with the need to assert his dominance. "Sir, let's not make this complicated," the man said, his voice stiff with practiced authority. "Your non-compliance gives us the right to escalate." A ghost of a smirk played on Elias's lips. "Escalate? You're standing on my land without a badge, without any legal mandate, and without the faintest idea of how much trouble you're already in. You have 30 seconds to leave before you deeply regret this little charade." Miranda snapped her head toward him, her voice laced with venomous irritation. "Do you really think threats will improve your situation? You've ignored letters, warnings, and fines. The HOA is here to maintain a safe and respectable community. People like you." She bit off the sentence, her mouth tightening, as if she'd stopped herself just in time. Elias caught it instantly, his eyes narrowing. "People like me?" "Be very careful how you complete that thought, Miranda." The bearded man tried to regain the upper hand. "Look, this doesn't have to be unpleasant. Just come with us. We'll wait for the officers, get this sorted out, and maybe they'll take it easy on you." "Officers?" Elias asked, his tone flat. "You mean actual police officers? Or are you referring to the counterfeit badges you two likely bought on the internet?" The taller man stiffened, but his partner shot an uneasy glance at Miranda. She surged forward, desperate to maintain the facade. "These men are authorized by the HOA board to ensure compliance. We are not required to justify ourselves to you." Elias let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Miranda, just listen to the words you're saying. You've brought 2 grown men dressed in discount tactical gear to my home. Do you truly believe that's how the law operates?" By this point, their audience was expanding. Curtains were parted in nearly every house on the street, and more phones were becoming visible in the windows. One neighbor had even stepped onto his porch, filming without any pretense of secrecy. Elias's voice dropped, low enough for the imposters, but loud enough for the watching neighbors. "Do you want to know what real authority feels like? It isn't 2 men playing dress-up. It's training. It's the law. It's accountability. And I can assure you, the real police will be fascinated by this little performance of yours." The bearded man's Adam's apple bobbed, his bravado beginning to fray, but the tall one doubled down, taking another step until he was mere inches from Elias. "I'm not playing. You're in violation. If you resist, we will restrain you." "Do not test me." Elias didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, his voice calm yet sharp enough to cut. "Son, I've gone face to face with cartel enforcers who had more sense than you. Do yourself a favor and step back before this escalates into something you can't just walk away from." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the man's face. His manufactured confidence was beginning to crack under the immense pressure of Elias's composure. Miranda, refusing to cede ground, shouted, "Why should the rest of us follow the rules while you do as you please? We have a system, Elias. We have order! And if you won't respect it, then perhaps you don't belong here at all." Elias's gaze locked onto her. "Respect isn't something you force with fake enforcers and hollow threats, Miranda. It's earned. And right now, what you're doing has nothing to do with rules. It's about control." Her words struck a nerve, harder than she anticipated. For a fleeting second, Miranda's confidence wavered, but she quickly masked it, folding her arms even more tightly across her chest. The bearded man shifted his weight, his anxiety finally showing. "Maybe we should just wait on the street," he muttered to his partner. but the taller one shot him a silencing glare. "No, we're not leaving." Elias let out a slow, deliberate breath, studying them. He knew their type. He had interrogated countless men who built their lives on intimidation, who confused fear with respect, and he knew precisely how to dismantle them without ever raising a fist. "Tell me something," Elias said evenly, his attention shifting back to Miranda. "When you summoned these two clowns, did you really think this through? Because the moment the real police arrive, and believe me, they are on their way, they won't be asking me the tough questions. They'll be asking you why you believed you had the authority to orchestrate an arrest." Miranda blinked, the color draining from her cheeks. From across the street, a voice boomed, "Leave the man alone!" The shout was loud enough to ripple down the entire block. Suddenly, this was no longer a simple HOA dispute. It was escalating into a neighborhood-wide standoff. Elias kept his eyes fixed on the men before him. "This is your final opportunity. Walk away now, before this entire block watches you get hauled away in handcuffs." The bearded man's face twitched, his resolve crumbling. But the tall one clenched, his fists refusing to surrender the illusion of power. But Elias knew a secret the others didn't. This confrontation was about to get much, much louder, and the neighborhood was about to become the stage for something far bigger. By now the street was electric with attention. What began as a terse exchange in Elias's driveway had morphed into a live-action spectacle. Curtains were no longer just twitching, windows were sliding open, doors were cracked ajar. People were leaning over porch railings, their phones held high. Hungry to capture every second of a scene that felt ripped from a television drama, a retired couple, the Abernathys, stood shoulder to shoulder on their porch across the street. Mr. Abernathy shook his head, muttering loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "I've never seen anything like it. What is she thinking, bringing fake cops into this neighborhood?" His wife whispered back. "I told you Miranda would go too far one day." Elias caught their words in disjointed fragments, but maintained his laser focus on the two imposters. His mind was sharp, cataloging every single detail: their sloppy attire, the way the taller man kept glancing down the street as if anticipating backup that would never arrive, the nervous twitch in the bearded man's hands. They weren't professionals. They were actors in a play that was rapidly falling apart. From the sidewalk, a teenager named Noah, whom Elias had seen shooting hoops, raised his phone higher and called out, "Yo, Mr. Corbin, I've got you on a live stream. Thousands of people are watching." The taller imposter snapped his head toward the boy. "Put that phone down," he barked, taking a menacing step in Noah's direction. That was a fatal error. Elias moved instantly, positioning his body between the man and the teenager. His voice turned sharp, cold, and unwavering. "You even think about touching that kid, and this ends right now." "Who's?" The imposter froze, the realization dawning on him for the first time that Elias was not intimidated. Not in the slightest. Miranda, flustered, tried to reclaim control. "This is a private neighborhood matter. None of you have any business interfering." Her words carried, but they only served to ignite the crowd. A woman with a baby on her hip yelled from her porch, "This doesn't look like a neighborhood matter. It looks like harassment to me." More voices joined the chorus. "This is wrong. Where did you even find these guys? You can't arrest your neighbor for mowing his lawn on the wrong day." The longer Miranda and her so-called enforcers stood there, the less control they seemed to possess. What was intended to intimidate Elias had transformed into a public trial, where they were the ones being judged by the eyes of every neighbor. Elias let the silence stretch for a moment before he spoke again. "Miranda, do you hear them? This isn't order. This is chaos, and you're the one who created it." Her jaw clenched, but her voice trembled slightly. "You're twisting everything, Elias. You've always been a problem, always bending the rules, ignoring the standards we've all worked so hard to establish." He tilted his head, studying her. "No, Miranda. The real problem is that you confuse control with leadership. They are not the same thing. That line resonated through the block like a final verdict. Neighbors shifted, whispering and nodding to one another. Phones continued to record, their lenses capturing every flicker of escalating tension. The bearded impostor wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. He was coming undone. "Look, man," he muttered under his breath, "maybe we should just leave. This isn't worth it." But his partner hissed back, "No, we finish this." The taller man squared his shoulders, trying to appear larger than life. "Last warning. You either come with us peacefully, or we will use force." Elias nearly laughed at the sheer absurdity. "You really want to do this in front of every single witness on this street, with a dozen cameras pointed directly at you? Go ahead. Show the world exactly who you are." The taller man faltered, his eyes darting nervously toward the glowing face, screens of the phones at the murmurs that were rising from the background. He could feel the immense weight of judgment pressing in from all sides. Miranda stepped forward again, desperation creeping into her voice. "Don't listen to him. He's manipulating all of you. He thinks because of his job." Elias cut her off sharply. "Careful, Miranda." His tone wasn't raised, but it carried more force than her shouting ever could. "You do not want to finish that sentence." The crowd quieted for a beat, as if everyone instinctively understood the gravity of the unspoken words. Elias turned his attention back to the imposters, lowering his voice just enough that they had to lean in to hear. "Listen to me very carefully. You have two options right now. You can leave quietly and pray the police don't charge you with impersonation, or you can continue this pathetic charade of power and let this entire street watch you get dismantled in real time." "Us." The bearded man swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to Miranda. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, clinging to the illusion that she still held control. But control was slipping through her fingers like sand. Across the street, Noah shouted, "They're finished, Mr. Corbin. We can all see it." His words fueled the crowd further, their voices rising in a chorus of agreement. Elias remained perfectly still, letting the neighborhood itself become his greatest ally. He didn't need to flex or threaten. The truth was already exposing them, one camera angle at a time. But as the pressure mounted and the block transformed into a stage, the imposters made a decision that would push the standoff into truly dangerous territory. The air was thick with a palpable tension, charged by the collective judgment of the entire neighborhood. Elias stood his ground in the driveway, a bastion of calm, while the two men in their cheap vests fidgeted under the weight of 100 unseen eyes. For a fleeting second, it seemed they might break. The bearded man's posture was a scream of retreat, his feet already angled toward the street. But the taller one, the man with the shaved head and mirrored shades, was not yet ready to concede. He suddenly reached into his vest and produced a pair of gleaming metal handcuffs. They clinked together loudly, the sharp sound slicing through the ambient chatter of the watching neighbors. The crowd let out a collective gasp, as if they had all felt the cold metallic bite of those cuffs themselves. "You're under neighborhood arrest," he declared, his voice cracking just slightly, betraying the facade of bravado he was desperately trying to maintain. "Don't make me put these on you the hard way." Elias's eyes locked onto the cuffs, then flicked back to the man's face. He spoke slowly, each word deliberately placed. "If you take one more step toward me with those handcuffs, you will be committing a felony. Impersonating an officer, attempted unlawful restraint, that carries prison time, not community service." The man's grip on the cuffs tightened, but his confidence was visibly wavering. His bearded partner whispered harshly, "Damon, this is insane. We can't actually cuff him. We'll be the ones getting locked up." "Shut up," Damon snapped, his voice carrying across the driveway. Miranda tried to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. She lifted her chin, projecting her voice for the benefit of the neighbors. "Don't let him frighten you. This is a law-abiding community, and we have every right to enforce our standards. He's just trying to bully his way out of this." But her words fell flat. The neighbors were no longer convinced. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "You don't have that right, Miranda." Another voice added, "This isn't enforcement, it's harassment." Elias leaned slightly closer to Damon, his tone quiet but as sharp as shattered glass. "I've seen real handcuffs. I've used real handcuffs. And I know when a man is bluffing. Drop them now, before this turns into something you'll never recover from." Damon's jaw worked furiously, his pride locked in a desperate battle with the reality that was closing in around him. The bearded man tugged at his sleeve, his voice trembling. "Come on, man, the cameras are rolling. We're going to get fried for this." But Damon shoved him back. "I said I've got this." He stepped forward, thrusting the cuffs out like a weapon. The crowd audibly recoiled, and someone screamed, "Call!" "The cops!" Dozens of phones tilted, capturing every conceivable angle of the standoff. Elias didn't move backward. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he squared his shoulders and said in a low, steady voice, "You are one heartbeat away from destroying your life. Think very carefully before you take that step." For the first time, Damon hesitated. Sweat beaded along his forehead, glistening in the Georgia sun. His hand shook, just slightly but enough for everyone to see. The authority he had tried so hard to project was cracking like glass under pressure. Linda, desperate to regain momentum, shouted, "Do it! Don't let him intimidate you. Put him in cuffs and show this neighborhood who's in charge." Her words backfired spectacularly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A middle-aged man from 3 houses down yelled back, "Linda, you've lost your mind. You are not the police." Others joined in, their voices turning the tide of public opinion firmly against her. Elias seized the moment, his voice rising just enough to carry calm but commanding. "Everyone here sees exactly what's happening. This isn't about rules or violations. This is about power, fake power. And these men are being pushed by someone who doesn't know the law, doesn't respect the law, and thinks that intimidation is the same as leadership." The bearded man dropped his gaze to the ground, shame washing over him. He muttered, "I didn't sign up for this." Damon glared at him, then at Miranda, torn between his wounded pride and his growing fear. But before he could make a decision, Elias stepped slightly closer, closing the space between them. His eyes were locked onto Damon's, his voice dropping to that chillingly calm register that only true professionals possess. "You lay one finger on me, and I promise you, the real police won't even have to ask me who you are. They'll already know. Because I will walk them through every single mistake you've made in the last 10 minutes. You think you're intimidating me, son? I dismantle men like you for a living." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Damon froze, his arm locked in place, the cuffs dangling uselessly. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with a low rumble of approval, voices overlapping. "He's right. Leave him alone. You're done." The street itself was choosing sides, and it was not with Miranda or her imposter enforcers. Elias finally straightened, his body language relaxed but unyielding. "Here's the truth. This is the end of your game. You have no authority. You have no power. And the longer you stand here pretending you do, the deeper the hole you're digging for yourselves." Damon's shoulders sagged, his grip loosening on the cuffs. The bearded man backed up another step, visibly unraveling. Miranda, however, looked as though she might explode. Her face flushed a deep red, her voice breaking into a shriek. "You don't belong here. You never have. That's why you're fighting so hard." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. The neighbors' murmurs sharpened into outrage. Someone yelled, "That's enough, Miranda!" Another voice, louder this time, added, "You're just exposing yourself now." Elias maintained his composure, but the sting of her words was not lost on him. He looked at her for a long moment, disappointment clear in his eyes. Then he turned back to Damon and his partner. "Take my advice. Walk away now. Because the next chapter in this story doesn't end with you going home. It ends with flashing lights, real handcuffs, and criminal charges you won't be able to explain away." But Miranda wasn't ready to quit, and her desperation was about to push the imposters into making their most reckless move yet. The standoff had reached its boiling point. Damon still clutched the handcuffs like a talisman, his arm hovering in midair, as if he couldn't decide whether to attack or surrender. The bearded man, whose name Elias had overheard as Leo, looked ready to flee. And Miranda stood at the epicenter of it all, red-faced and trembling, with a fury that was rapidly consuming her, barking commands that no one seemed willing to obey anymore. Elias took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone deeply uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice neither loud nor threatening, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Damon Leo, let me ask you a simple question. Do you have any idea what happens to someone who impersonates a federal officer? Forget state charges. Forget HOA bylaws. I'm talking about federal law. Do you know the minimum sentence for that?" Damon blinked behind his mirrored shades, his lips parting as if he wanted to answer but couldn't form the words. Elias didn't wait. 3 years. That's the minimum. And that's if you get lucky. If you escalate, if you lay a hand on me, we're talking about more. Assault, false imprisonment, conspiracy. You do the math. Leo's eyes widened, the fight draining out of him with every syllable. "Miranda, he's not joking," he whispered harshly, but everyone nearby still heard him. Miranda snapped back. "Don't listen to him! He's bluffing! He wants you to be scared so you'll back down!" Elias shifted his gaze to her, his voice calm but cutting. "You've already lost, Miranda. The crowd knows it, your neighbors know it, and deep down, you know it too." The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman holding her toddler muttered, "He's right." "This is insane." Damon's hand finally dropped, the cuffs hanging at his side like a dead weight. But Elias wasn't finished. He stepped forward, closing the distance, and his tone changed, calm, conversational, yet laced with the sharp precision of a man who had stared down cartel lieutenants without breaking a sweat. "You know what separates real authority from fake authority?" Elias asked, his eyes moving from Damon to Leo to Miranda. "It's accountability. Real officers answer to the law. Fake ones answer to their pride. And pride will get you killed or locked up." The line struck Damon like a physical blow. He shifted uncomfortably, sweat dripping down his temple. Elias continued, his voice carrying for the neighbors, still filming. "This community deserves better than fear tactics. They deserve honesty. They deserve leaders who solve problems with respect, not with intimidation." Miranda let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Respect? Don't you dare lecture me about respect. Do you have any idea how many hours I've poured into this neighborhood? Do you know how many complaints I've had to field? People want order, Elias. They want someone to stand up and keep things proper." "Order doesn't come from force," Elias replied evenly. "It comes from trust. And trust is gone the second you drag in imposters with fake vests and threaten your neighbors." Damon swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe he's right, Miranda. Maybe we should just go." "No," Miranda snapped, spinning toward him. "If we walk away now, we lose everything. Everyone here sees this. They'll think I can't handle my job." "Do you want that?" Leo finally spoke up, his patience exhausted. "You think this is about your reputation? I'm not going to prison for you, Miranda. I didn't sign up for this mess." He ripped the Velcro patch from his vest and tossed it onto the pavement. The cheap fabric fluttered against the driveway, a silent confession. Gasps rippled through the neighborhood as phones zoomed in. The illusion was breaking apart piece by piece. Elias's gaze returned to Damon. "That's one down. What about you?" Damon's hands trembled, the cuffs rattling against his thigh. For the first time, his bravado cracked wide open, enough for Elias to see the frightened man cowering behind the mirrored shades. "Think carefully," Elias pressed, his voice low, almost intimate. "Miranda won't be there when the police start asking questions. She won't sit beside you in the courtroom. She won't do your time. She'll save herself, and you'll be the one wearing real cuffs." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Damon finally let the handcuffs slip from his grasp. They clattered against the pavement, the sound ringing out louder than any of Miranda's protests. "No," Miranda shouted, stomping her foot like a child denied a treat. "Pick them up. Don't let him win." But Damon didn't move. He backed away a single step, his chest heaving with the weight of his regret. Elias took that moment to drive the final nail in. He straightened, looking directly at Miranda. "Leadership isn't about winning, Miranda. It's about responsibility. And you have failed yours." The neighbors erupted, not with applause, but with a rising tide of voices. "He's right. She's gone too far." We don't want this in our neighborhood anymore." Miranda looked around, her face pale, finally realizing that the power she thought she commanded was slipping through her fingers faster than she could possibly grasp. Elias bent down, picked up the cuffs Damon had dropped, and held them up for the crowd to see. This is what happens when you confuse control with justice, when you mistake fear for respect. But this isn't justice. It's fraud. The cuffs gleamed in the sun, punctuating his words. But before the neighborhood could fully absorb what had just happened, Damon made a reckless choice that threatened to turn words into violence. The tension should have shattered when the cuffs hit the ground, but Damon wasn't done. His wounded pride refused to let him walk away defeated. With sweat dripping down his temple and his chest rising in sharp, ragged breaths, he lunged forward, shoving past Leo and closing the gap between himself and Elias. The crowd gasped in unison. Phones tilted, capturing every angle. Someone shouted, "Don't touch him!" But Damon either didn't hear or didn't care. He reached for Elias's wrist, intent on forcing the cuffs back into the conflict. It was his final catastrophic mistake. In a single fluid motion, Elias's training took over. He sidestepped, seized Damon's arm, and twisted it behind his back with surgical precision. The very cuffs Damon had dropped moments earlier were now in Elias's hands, snapping shut around Damon's own wrists before the man could even process what was happening. Damon cried out, more from shock than from pain, and stumbled to his knees. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. The crowd roared with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Someone yelled, "Did you see that?" Another voice echoed, "He didn't even fight back. He just moved." Elias didn't gloat. He simply held Damon in place with minimal force, his voice calm and professional, as though he were conducting routine business. "You're done. Don't resist. It will only make things worse." Miranda's face twisted in horror. "What are you doing? You can't arrest him." Elias's eyes snapped to her, sharp and cold. "You're right, I can't. But I can detain him for impersonating an officer until real law enforcement arrives. And considering he just attempted to assault me on my own property, the charges are continuing to stack up." The neighbors erupted again, some clapping, others shouting in outrage at Miranda. "You set this up. You pushed them too far." "This is on you, Miranda." Leo, who had already stripped off his vest, took several steps back, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm out! I'm done! I didn't sign up for this." His voice cracked with genuine fear. "Lady, you never told us he was law enforcement." Elias's voice cut through the noise, calm and steady. "That's because she didn't know." Miranda blinked, momentarily disarmed. "What are you talking about?" Elias straightened, keeping Damon restrained with one hand. His other hand reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with practiced ease, holding it high enough for everyone, including the dozens of cameras pointed at him, to see the gold badge glinting in the sunlight. "I'm Special Agent Elias Corbin," he announced, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The street fell silent. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and Damon's ragged breathing as he knelt, cuffed, on the driveway. The neighbors stared, their shock a tangible thing. Mrs. Abernathy, across the street, clutched her husband's arm and whispered, "I knew he carried himself differently." Noah, the teenager still filming, shouted, "No way! FBI, he's FBI." The phones caught every second. The badge, the authority in his voice, the look on Miranda's face as the devastating truth sank in. Elias's eyes never left her. "You came onto my property with imposters, Miranda. You endangered your own neighbors, thinking that intimidation would grant you control. But you didn't do your homework. You had no idea who you were dealing with." Her lips quivered, but she tried to recover. This is an abuse of power. You can't just—" He cut her off, his voice like steel. "Abuse of power? That's rich, coming from the woman who staged a fake arrest over an HOA dispute. What I'm doing is lawful. What you did is criminal." The neighbors murmured again, this time with an edge of disgust. Every word Miranda tried to speak now only buried her deeper in shame. Elias adjusted his grip on Damon and addressed the crowd. "Let's be clear. This isn't about lawn height or driveways. It's about people pretending to have authority they do not possess. People who think fear is a substitute for leadership. That ends today." Damon groaned, his pride shattered. while Leo stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Miranda finally shouted, desperation boiling over. "You're making a spectacle of this. You're humiliating me." Elias's expression softened, though his tone did not. "No, Miranda, you did that to yourself. You let pride blind you. You put this entire neighborhood at risk because you couldn't tolerate the idea of losing control." The phones kept rolling, the evidence undeniable. Damon was breathing heavily now, sweat soaking through his shirt, while Leo looked like he might bolt at any moment. Elias's badge glinted again in the sunlight, a stark reminder that the game had shifted completely. "Here's the part you need to understand," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from service, from protecting people, not intimidating them. And when you fake authority, when you cross that line, there is always a reckoning." Miranda shook her head violently, her denial collapsing into a desperate plea. "This isn't how it was supposed to go. You weren't supposed to fight back." Elias met her eyes one final time, and his words landed like a judge's gavel. "That's because you never expected to meet someone who knows what real authority looks like." The neighborhood was silent again, stunned by the revelation. Cameras zoomed in tighter. What had begun as a petty HOA stunt was now national news in the making. But the situation wasn't over yet, because the sound of real police sirens was already echoing down the block, and the truth was about to become official. The wail of sirens rolled down the block, sharp and undeniable, cutting through the hot Georgia air like a final judgment. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. The neighbors stirred, shifting from their porches and sidewalks, their phones tilting to capture the climactic moment that would decide how this standoff concluded. Damon knelt on the driveway, hands cuffed behind him, his bravado utterly erased. Leo had retreated to the curb, his head in his hands, muttering curses to himself. And Miranda, her face pale, her voice shaky, was desperately trying to hold on to whatever shred of control she thought she still possessed. "You can't do this," she stammered. "The police will side with me. They know me. I'm the president of this HOA." Elias adjusted his stance, keeping Damon restrained with practiced ease. His voice was steady, a matter-of-fact counterpoint to her hysteria. "Linda, the only thing they'll know is that you hired imposters to intimidate a homeowner, and they'll know because your entire neighborhood watched you do it." He tilted his chin toward the crowd. "Every single phone out here is a piece of evidence." Miranda glanced around wildly, and the truth of his words hit her. It was true. Neighbors on all sides had their cameras raised. Some were whispering into their phones, likely live streaming, while others simply recorded, capturing every word, every flicker of panic on her face. The Abernathys, still on their porch, shook their heads in disbelief. "She's finished?" Mr. Abernathy muttered. His wife nodded. "It's all on tape." Elias leaned slightly toward Damon, who was trembling. "Stay still. When the officers arrive, I will turn you over to them." "Don't make this any harder on yourself," Damon didn't argue. His fight was gone, replaced by a chilling dread of what awaited him once those flashing lights reached the driveway. The crowd buzzed with a new energy as the patrol cars finally arrived, two of them, their tires crunching against the asphalt as they parked diagonally across the street. Doors swung open, and uniformed officers emerged, their hands near their belts, their eyes scanning the scene with professional suspicion. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked. Elias immediately raised his free hand, still holding Damon securely with the other. His voice was calm and clear. "Officers, I'm Special Agent Elias Corbin, FBI. My badge is in my pocket, identification ready. The man in my custody attempted to impersonate law enforcement and assaulted me on my property." The officers hesitated, their eyes darting from the badge, glinting in Elias's wallet, to the neighborhood full of witnesses. One officer, a broad-shouldered man with dark hair, stepped closer, his hand outstretched. "Let me see your credentials, sir," Elias nodded slowly, reaching into his pocket and producing his ID. The officer studied it carefully, then looked back at Elias. Something in his expression shifted, a mixture of respect and relief. "All right," the officer said firmly. "You're good. We'll take him from here." The crowd broke into murmurs again, relief mixing with excitement. Phones zoomed in as the officers lifted Damon to his feet and walked him toward the squad car. Miranda's voice cracked, desperation pouring out. "Wait, no, he's not the criminal here. Elias is. He's twisting everything. You have to believe me." Another officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, stepped toward Miranda. "Ma'am, we've got multiple witnesses, and from what I can see, this looks very bad for you. Did you authorize these men to act as law enforcement?" Miranda's mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd murmured louder, neighbors calling out, "She brought them here." "We saw it all. She told them to arrest him." The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're going to need to step aside. If you continue to interfere, we will have to treat this as obstruction." Miranda's shoulders slumped, her fight draining away. Her authority, once absolute in the eyes of her HOA board, meant nothing under the flashing red and blue lights. Elias kept his composure, standing tall as Damon was loaded into the back of a squad car. Leo stood off to the side, his hands raised nervously, muttering, "I didn't touch anybody, I swear. I'm done. I just want to go home." An officer approached him. "We'll need your statement." "Don't move." The crowd was no longer silent. Neighbors whispered, cheered softly, or simply stared, unable to believe the spectacle that had unfolded in their quiet community. Children clung to their parents, their eyes wide, absorbing the lesson that authority could be faked and just as easily exposed. Elias finally spoke, his voice rising just enough for the neighbors to hear. "This is why you don't let fear dictate your choices. Real authority doesn't hide behind fake vests and intimidation. It serves, it protects, and it answers to the truth." The younger officer glanced at him with something close to admiration before turning back to her unit. Miranda, however, couldn't let it go. She shouted one last desperate plea. "You think you've won, Elias? But people like you don't belong in neighborhoods like this." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some voices shouted back immediately, "That's enough! We all heard you, Miranda. You've lost every ounce of respect." Elias didn't react with anger. He simply looked at her with quiet disappointment. "You just told everyone exactly who you are, and that will stay with you longer than anything I could ever say." Phones captured her collapse, her neighbors turning away from her, shaking their heads, muttering under their breath. Miranda, the once proud president of the HOA, now stood exposed and isolated, her authority shattered. But as Damon sat in the back of the squad car and Leo prepared to give his statement, the fallout of Miranda's actions was only beginning, and the neighborhood was about to reckon with the damage she had caused. By the time both patrol cars were parked and Damon was sitting cuffed in the back of one, the neighborhood had transformed into something resembling an open-air courtroom. Neighbors clustered at the ends of their driveways, whispering, pointing, and filming, their voices a symphony of disbelief and satisfaction. The hum of squad car radios crackled through the air, blending with the steady wail of a siren still winding down. Officer Ramirez, the broad-shouldered man who had first taken Elias's ID, stood at the center of the scene, speaking in a low voice with his partner, Officer Green. Every so often their eyes flicked toward Miranda, who was pacing like a caged animal, muttering under her breath and shaking her head. Elias stood calm and upright near his front steps, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He hadn't moved since Damon had been loaded into the squad car, and he didn't need to. His stillness radiated more authority than Miranda's frantic pacing ever could. Finally, Officer Ramirez walked over to him. "Agent Corbin, I appreciate your cooperation. We've confirmed your credentials with dispatch. From the looks of it, you handled this situation by the book." Elias gave a slight nod. "My goal was to prevent it from escalating further. He came at me with handcuffs. I had no choice but to detain him until you arrived." Ramirez sighed. "Well, the good news is we've got everything on tape. Between your neighbors' recordings and our body cams, it's a pretty airtight case. Impersonation, unlawful restraint, trespassing, conspiracy. We'll let the DA sort out the charges." Elias glanced at Miranda, who froze under his gaze. "Don't forget instigation," he said evenly. Ramirez followed his look. "Yeah, we're not ignoring her role." He raised his voice toward the younger Officer Green. "Bring her over here." The crowd murmured again, buzzing with anticipation. Officer Green approached Miranda. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." Miranda lifted her chin, trying to mask her fear with indignation. This is a misunderstanding. I was only trying to maintain community standards. That's my job. I didn't commit a crime. Green's tone stayed neutral but firm. Ma'am, your job does not involve authorizing private citizens to impersonate law enforcement. We'll need you to come with us and provide a statement downtown. Gasps rippled across the neighborhood. Someone whispered, "They're taking her in." Another muttered, "About time." Miranda's composure finally cracked. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA President." Elias's voice cut through her outburst, calm but devastating. "That title doesn't place you above the law, Miranda. If anything, it means you should have known better." Phones zoomed in, capturing her face as the truth finally sank in. Green placed a hand gently on her arm, guiding her toward the squad car. She resisted at first, pulling back, but the officer's grip tightened just enough to show she had no choice. The neighbors muttered again, some recording, others whispering as Miranda was escorted past them, her authority stripped away in real time. Leo, still lingering at the curb, spoke up nervously. "Am I going to jail too?" Ramirez turned to him. "We'll need a full statement from you. Depending on your role in this, that will determine whether charges stick." "The best thing you can do right now is cooperate fully," Leo nodded quickly, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. I never wanted it to go this far." Ramirez gave him a curt nod before signaling another officer to escort him aside. Elias exhaled slowly, finally letting some of the tension leave his shoulders. The neighbors' voices swirled around him, a mix of admiration, relief, and quiet awe. A few clapped softly. One man called out, "You handled that better than anyone else could have." He didn't respond to the applause. He simply looked at the officers and asked, "What happens next?" Ramirez answered, "We'll book Damon and Miranda, get their statements, and file the charges. Leo's involvement will depend on what he admits. After that, it's up to the courts. You'll likely be asked to testify." Elias gave another nod. "That's fine." His eyes swept across the neighborhood, meeting the stares of his neighbors. "The important thing is that this street is safe again." Officer Green stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know, Agent Corbin, we don't usually walk into scenes like this, where the suspect's already cuffed and detained. You made our job a lot easier today." Elias's tone stayed professional. "I didn't want blood on anyone's hands. That's always the goal, control without chaos." But the irony wasn't lost on him. The neighborhood was far from calm. For years, Miranda had ruled with an iron fist disguised as community leadership, and tonight, that illusion had shattered in front of every single resident. The Abernathys whispered to each other, their eyes on Elias. "He's not just a neighbor anymore," Mrs. Abernathy said softly. "He's the one who protected us from her." Her husband nodded. "People are going to remember this." As the squad cars prepared to pull away, one carrying Damon and the other Miranda, the crowd lingered, unable to look away. The flashing lights painted the brick homes in strobing shades of red and blue, a reminder that their neighborhood had changed forever in a single afternoon. Elias stood tall and silent, his gaze fixed on the departing cars. He hadn't asked for any of this, but he knew the fallout was only beginning. But what no one on that street yet realized was that the aftermath, the fallout in the days that followed, would change their community far more than this one confrontation ever could. The following days in Serenity Creek felt like the neighborhood was living under a magnifying glass. The flashing lights may have vanished, but the tension had not. What had played out in Elias's driveway didn't just conclude with two people in the back of squad cars. It spread through the block like wildfire. By Sunday morning, everyone had seen the videos. Clips were circulating on Facebook groups, shared on Nextdoor, and were even making their way to local news stations. The headline scrolled across one Atlanta news channel. HOA President detained after confrontation with FBI agent neighbor. For neighbors who had quietly resented Miranda's heavy-handed approach, it felt like a vindication. Mrs. Abernathy waved at Elias from her porch the next morning, her voice carrying across the street. "You did this community a service. Don't you ever forget that." Others weren't as vocal, but their glances spoke volumes. Some looked at Elias with a newfound respect, others with a palpable unease. because no one had expected that the man who waved politely while mowing his lawn was an FBI agent capable of handling danger with such surgical precision. Miranda's absence was glaring. Her house sat dark, the blinds drawn, her car gone. The HOA board sent out a carefully worded email by Tuesday. The association will be conducting a special meeting to address recent events and determine next steps in leadership. Neighbors read between the lines. Miranda was finished. But the fallout wasn't just about Miranda. Damon's mugshot had been plastered across local news sites, his background revealing a trail of minor criminal charges: petty theft, disorderly conduct, unpaid fines. Nothing suggested authority, but everything screamed desperation. Leo, meanwhile, was cooperating fully, giving detailed statements to the police about how Miranda had recruited them with promises of community enforcement pay. He admitted she had stoked their egos, telling them the neighborhood needed strong men to keep people like Elias in line. This revelation disgusted most neighbors. In hushed conversations over hedges and driveways, the full truth spilled out. Miranda had been complaining about Elias for months, using coded language, and hinting that he wasn't a good fit for the neighborhood. By Wednesday, a group of residents gathered in the community park for an informal meeting. Elias hadn't planned to attend, but when he walked by on his evening jog, the group waved him over. "Agent Corbin," one man called out, his tone respectful, "we just want to thank you. What you did, it showed us all what was really going on." Elias slowed, catching his breath and shaking his head. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I live here too. My family lives here. And I wasn't about to let intimidation rule this street." A woman holding her daughter's hand spoke up. "But it's bigger than that. You showed us that fear only works if we let it. Miranda has been making people feel small for years, and no one pushed back until you." Elias's gaze softened. He crouched slightly, so he was at eye level with the little girl. "That's the lesson you need to remember. Bullies get their power when good people stay quiet. But when you stand your ground, when you speak the truth, fear loses its grip." The girl smiled shyly, clutching her mother's hand tighter. Word of Elias's role didn't stay local for long. By Friday, a national morning show had picked up the story. The clip of him calmly showing his badge while holding Damon restrained. Played on a loop, the anchor describing it as a moment where truth cut through false authority. But Elias never leaned into the fame. When a reporter stopped by his house for a comment, he politely declined. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about accountability. That's the real story." Behind the cameras, however, he couldn't help but reflect on what it all meant. For years, his work at the Bureau had been about dismantling networks far larger and more dangerous than one overzealous HOA president. Yet here, on his own street, he'd faced something just as corrosive: misused power dressed up as leadership. At the next HOA meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove Miranda from her position. Her chair sat empty, a silent symbol of how far she had fallen. A new president was chosen, someone quieter, humbler, someone who promised transparency and collaboration. Still, the wound lingered. The neighborhood wasn't going to forget the day its leader had tried to weaponize fake authority against one of their own. Parents talked about it with their children. Teachers at the local elementary school even used it as an example in class discussions about honesty and responsibility. For Elias, the fallout was less about Miranda's downfall and more about the conversations it sparked. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another were suddenly talking about what community truly meant, what leadership should look like, and why accountability mattered so much. One evening, as he stood watering his front lawn, Noah, the teenager who had live-streamed the entire incident, approached him. "Mr. Corbin," he said almost shyly, "that video is at 1 million views now. People keep saying you're a hero." Elias smiled faintly. "I'm not a hero, Noah. I'm just a man who refused to be bullied." Noah tilted his head, thoughtful. "Yeah, but you showed all of us how to do it." Elias looked down the street, where kids were riding bikes again and neighbors were chatting on their porches. The block wasn't perfect, but it felt lighter now, freer somehow. "Maybe that's the real win," he said quietly. But even as peace returned to the street, Elias knew there was still one more lesson to share, the kind of truth that could outlast any HOA rule or neighborhood feud. Saturday morning came again, exactly 1 week after the confrontation that had shaken the neighborhood. The air felt calmer, the lawns were freshly cut, and kids were racing their bikes without their parents peering nervously through the blinds. Yet the echoes of that day still lingered. Every time someone passed Elias's driveway, they glanced at it as if it were a historical landmark, the place where truth stood taller than intimidation. Elias himself kept his routine simple. He walked out with his morning coffee, leaned against the railing of his porch, and watched the block stir awake. He hadn't sought out the attention, but the neighborhood gave it to him anyway. A neighbor waved as she loaded groceries into her car. A man mowing his lawn raised a hand in thanks. Even people who had never spoken to him before now offered nods of quiet acknowledgement. But Elias didn't bask in it. He wasn't wired that way. What sat on his mind wasn't pride. It was the lesson he wanted his community to carry forward. That afternoon, the HOA board called a special neighborhood gathering in the community park. Word spread quickly, and nearly every household sent someone. Families sat on folding chairs, children ran in the grass, and a sense of quiet anticipation filled the air. When Elias arrived, conversations hushed. He wasn't there as an official speaker, just as a neighbor, but the new board chair, a quiet man named Harold Jennings, who had just been voted interim president, asked him to address the group. Elias hesitated at first, then stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice much, but the crowd leaned in, hanging on his every word. "Last week," he began, "we all saw what happens when authority is faked, when power is used to intimidate instead of to protect. And the truth is, it could have gone very differently. Someone could have been hurt, children were watching, phones were recording, lives could have been ruined far worse than they already were." He paused, scanning the faces before him, some solemn, some curious, some still ashamed. "What I want you to take away from that moment isn't about me. It isn't about the FBI. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Do we want fear to govern our streets, or do we want respect and accountability?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elias continued, "Leadership isn't about control. It's about service, and service means putting people first, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't get credit for it. That's the difference between authority and arrogance." A hand shot up from the back. It was Mrs. Abernathy, her voice strong despite her age. "Agent Corbin, what should we do the next time someone tries something like this?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Stand together, speak up. Don't let fear isolate you. The reason those imposters had any chance at all was because they thought the neighborhood would stay silent. Silence is what bullies feed on. But when you speak the truth, when you shine a light on the lies, the game ends." The crowd clapped softly, then louder, as the message settled in. Parents nodded, whispering to their children. The teenagers, including Noah, filmed from the back, capturing every word for a new live stream. Elias looked down at Noah. "You keep posting those videos, young man, but make sure they're not just about drama. Use your platform to spread the truth, to show people what accountability looks like." Noah grinned. "Yes, sir. That's the plan." As the gathering ended, people lingered, talking with one another more than they had in years. Strangers introduced themselves, shaking hands, asking about their families. The tension that once defined their street seemed to dissolve into something else, connection. Later that evening, Elias returned home. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the quiet block. He stood for a moment at the end of his driveway, the very spot where everything had gone down just days earlier. The memory of Damon's cuffs, Miranda's shouts, and the flashing red and blue lights was still vivid, but now that space symbolized something else. a turning point. He thought back to his years in the Bureau, the endless briefings about criminal networks, the dangerous missions, the times he had stared into the eyes of men who lived on fear and power. And it struck him that sometimes the battles that mattered most weren't fought in foreign cities or dark alleys. They were fought right at home, on the streets where children played and families built their lives. He whispered quietly to himself, almost as a prayer, "The truth always comes to light." The sound of children laughing down the block pulled him back. He smiled faintly, picked up the empty trash can by the curb, and walked it back to his garage. Because life was moving forward, and that was the entire point. For those who had watched the standoff unfold, the moral was clear. Real power comes not from titles, intimidation, or fear, but from honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. If you're watching this story right now, ask yourself, in your own community, in your own life, are you building with fear or with respect? Are you staying silent, or are you speaking truth when it's hardest? That's the choice each of us faces, whether we wear a badge or not. So if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about leadership, community, and the meaning of true authority, make sure to subscribe, because stories like this remind us all that sometimes the fight for justice happens right where we live.